Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Yuka Royer. This week, we head to Japan, where a city north of Tokyo shut down nearly 100 schools following a series of bear sightings as the animals re-emerged from hibernation. The number of bear attacks has been on the rise in recent years as they appear more and more often in populated areas. A record 13 people lost their lives and more than 200 were injured last year, and the trend is continuing. 5 people already lost their lives between April and early June of this year. Emerald Maxwell has more.
After a multi-day hunt, the bear was finally tracked down to a private property in a residential neighbourhood, where it was subdued with a tranquilizer gun shot by a local zookeeper.
I found some spots where I could take the shot. 3 places in total. The closest one ended up being the easiest to shoot from, so I took the shot from there.
It followed 3 days of panic in the city north of Tokyo, with schools closed amid dozens of sightings of the wild black bear. The city is now yet to decide what to do with it.
It's the first time I've ever seen anything like this, or that something like this has happened here. So I was quite surprised.
It wasn't so much scary as it just felt so unreal. So I didn't really feel any fear at first. Until it got closer, that is.
Bear attacks have spiked in Japan, including in urban areas. Last week, a bear that attacked and injured 4 people in Fukushima evaded capture. The mayor said that the animal appeared to be extremely intelligent. It had been seen turning on a tap to drink water and managed to escape the factory it had become trapped in, apparently by opening a window. The country reported a record 13 deaths in 2025, prompting the government to set up a task force this year to reduce incidents. Bears have become emboldened to seek food in urban areas thanks to the combination of a decline in hunting, an ageing and declining human population in rural areas, and the effects of climate change on natural bear food.
Well, for more, let's cross now to Hiroshima to speak with Kazuhiko Maita, founder and president of the Institute for Asian Black Bear Research and Preservation. Thank you for joining us. こんにちは。よろしくお願いします。Now, you have been tracking Eocene activity in Japan for over half a century and encountered thousands of bears in the wild. You've also been attacked a number of times. How did you survive?
40
years ago, we didn't have good tranquilizers. So there were bears that stood up after I gave the jab. As I didn't have any weapons, all I could do was run away. I also sometimes checked on bears during their hibernation by sticking my head inside a bear hole. And 3 times I came across ones that weren't asleep. They came out and attacked me. Altogether, I have survived 9 bear attacks that happened in various different situations. But they happened while I was doing field work, so maybe not helpful information for ordinary people. But I can tell you that I've never been attacked by a bear while I was just walking through the mountains.
So why do bears attack people in general?
There are several patterns. When they wander into a town or a farm and they come across humans, they generally seek places to hide, like a forest, and run towards it. If a human is in its path, it sees it as an obstacle and tries to knock it out of the way. When humans pass nearby when the animal is eating, then they get attacked. A mother bear with a cub is very protective, so when humans walk nearby, it attacks. And then there are pure coincidences, when a bear and humans bump into each other, whether in town or in the mountains. And then there are rare cases when, like we saw in 2025, when there was a severe food shortage for bears, The animals don't get enough protein and crave for a good source of the nutrient. So they attack humans to eat.
And how intelligent are bears? A bear that was seen in Fukushima, we saw earlier in the image. It reportedly unlatched a window and drank from the water tap by itself. Is it really possible for a bear to do such things?
Yes, it's possible. Window latches and water taps usually have the smell of humans left on them, and that draws a bear's attention. So it scratches them repeatedly. Then eventually, a water tap or a window can be opened.
So why has Japan been seeing a sudden increase in bear sightings in recent years and bear attacks in recent years?
The number of incidents has grown proportionally to an increasing bear population. People are afraid that bears are becoming more aggressive or that they're evolving and becoming cleverer. But human casualty patterns we're seeing today are the same as 200 years ago. A bear attacks a human, and if the human dies, it eats it. So there's no evolution in the animal behavior. I think the reason why we are seeing more incidents in Japan's northeast is because there are simply more bears around.
Do they attack to eat? Do they want to eat humans?
When their usual food source becomes scarce, it is thought that bears become more dependent on protein. So they increasingly prey on dogs and humans to eat them. I think the main reason why those incidents are on the rise is that the population of bears is outstripping its nutritious source.
Now, you have been working on the conservation of wild bears in Japan. How can humans and bears then peacefully coexist?
It's not easy to achieve a peaceful human-bear coexistence. In the west of Japan, bears were facing the threat of extinction. So when they were caught, authorities generally released them back into the wild and just tried to track their numbers. When there were too many of them, they killed them, and when their population declined, they released more of them. But in the northeast, the number of bears has increased so much that it's no longer necessary to do that kind of population control. This year, there's actually plenty of food for them in the wild. Those bears that still come out to populated areas are ones that have become attached to human food. We call them urban bears in Japan. Those animals, I think, need to be taken down in order to prevent human casualties and avoid exhausting local officials and police.
Well, Kazuhiko Maita, thank you so much. Now, France 24's Charlotte Lamb is in the studio for more. Now, bears are also deeply ingrained in Japanese culture, aren't they, Charlotte? And that's complicating efforts to tackle this crisis.
Well, that definitely seems to be the case. That we know that in Shinto and in Buddhist traditions, they really put an emphasis on spiritual significance in parts of Japan, and they really put a deep respect for nature and wildlife. And in some prefectures, bears are actually considered mountain deities. So when the government moves to cull bears, it hits a wall of genuine resistance. And a number of conservation groups have been actively pushing back against expanded hunting, and they're urging for non-lethal measures instead. Then you you have to consider Japan's demographic crisis. We know the country is suffering from a shrinking and aging community, and this also applies to hunters who must abide by strict gun laws and pay for ammunition and rifle storage. So we can show you some statistics now. Japan had nearly 518,000 licensed hunters in 1975. That's according to official data, but the number had plummeted by more than half to around 218,000 in 2020. And at the time, 60% of license holders were aged over 60 and over. It's also important to note that in 1975, about 98% of those licenses were for shooting, but that figure had dropped to 42% in 2020. So those remaining licenses were for trapping. Now, the people who would traditionally manage bear populations seem to be aging out, and there's nobody replacing them. Some sociologists, Yuka, even point to the declining number of children in rural villages. They say that children's natural, noisy presence used to once help deter bears from coming closer.
And so I understand that there's almost an ironic conservation angle here, but is climate change playing a role here too?
Well, that's exactly right. We know that in the 1980s that the overhunting had caused this black bear populations to plummet. Some areas had lost the species entirely. The bears only rebounded after conservation plans limited hunting. So Japan protected its bears, the bears recovered, and then there was no management plan to match the population growth. Then climate throws fuel on this fire. In 2025, there was a mass failure in acorn and beech nut production. This forced bears to travel into unknown territories to find food. Hot weather is good for bear reproduction, but not for wild nuts. So we're seeing more bears competing for less food. And this is entirely predictable. Nut harvests tend to cycle between good and poor years. So researchers are already warning that next year's harvest is likely to cause another spike in bear attacks.
So Japan is clearly struggling with its own specific situation, but how does it compare to other countries that have sizable bear populations?
Well, we can bring up a map to show you now that this just isn't a remote wilderness problem. Asian black bears cover the vast majority of the country's main island, where most of Japan's 125 million people actually live, and roughly 70% of its land is covered by forests. Globally, Japan is a relatively small country producing a disproportionate number of deadly encounters. The US and Canada combined, for instance, average around 3 fatal bear deaths per year, and they both have far bigger bear populations. But Japan isn't alone. Romania, which has the largest brown bear population in the EU, is grappling with the rising attacks too, but this is on a smaller scale. The key difference here is where it's happening. In Romania, North America, and even in France, attacks tend to be on hikers, hunters, those near the forest edges, people who've gone into bear territory. In Japan, where the barrier seems to be much smaller, bears are turning up in schools, supermarkets, train stations, and military barracks, as we're seeing.
Blurred lines indeed. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for that. And that's it for this edition of Access Asia. Thanks for watching, and do stay tuned if you can. There's more world news coming up on France 24.